The sun hadn't even cleared the horizon when Dennis Webb climbed into his pickup truck that morning. He'd been farming this land for 23 years now, and his body knew the routine better than his mind did. Coffee in a thermos, boots caked with yesterday's mud, and that nagging feeling in his gut that something was off. He noticed it immediately when he turned onto the dirt road leading to his northern wheat field. The sky had this weird orange glow to it, not like a sunrise but something hotter, angrier. Smoke rose in a thick column about half a mile out. "Damn teenagers," he muttered, thinking maybe some kids had been out drinking and set a brush fire. Wouldn't be the first time. But as he got closer, his gut told him this wasn't any brush fire. The crater was massive. Had to be 50 feet across, maybe more. His wheat was completely flattened in a circle around it, stalks bent and burned. And in the center of it all was something that made Dennis's brain stutter trying to process what he was seeing. It looked like a ship, but not like any aircraft he'd ever seen. The hull was curved, almost organic looking, covered in dark red scales that seemed to shimmer even while scorched and cracked. Steam rose from the wreckage and there was this smell in the air, something between copper and ozone that made his nose itch. Dennis grabbed his rifle from the gun rack. Probably stupid to approach, but he wasn't about to let whatever this was sit in his field without at least checking it out. As he got closer he could see the damage was severe. Whole sections of the craft had been torn open, exposing what looked like bone and sinew instead of wires and circuits. That's when he heard the voice. "Please." It was weak, barely above a whisper, but definitely there. "Human. I can smell you. Just end this." Dennis froze. The voice was speaking English, but the accent was all wrong. The words came out raspy with this clicking sound between syllables. "Who's in there?" Dennis called out, rifle raised but not quite aimed. "A dead thing," the voice responded. "Soon to be, anyway. Do me this kindness. Make it quick." Dennis circled around to where the cockpit had been torn open. What he saw inside made every instinct in his body scream at him to run. The creature was huge, even crumpled up as it was. Easily 12 feet long, covered in scales that ranged from deep crimson to almost black. Its wings, or what was left of them, were twisted at impossible angles, bone jutting through membrane. 4 legs, each ending in claws the size of kitchen knives. And the head? It was reptilian, with horns curving back from its skull and eyes that glowed with this inner golden light. A dragon. An honest-to-God dragon. Except Dennis knew there was no such thing as dragons on Earth, which meant this thing was from somewhere else entirely. "You're one of them," Dennis said slowly. "A draconian." He'd seen the news broadcasts, heard about the alien empire that controlled systems light years away. Humanity had made contact 5 years ago, and the relationship had been cold at best. The draconians didn't think much of humans. "Yes," the creature hissed. "And you are human. So you understand what I ask. Your kind knows about mercy killing, yes? For wounded animals." "I'm not shooting anyone who can talk to me," Dennis said, lowering his rifle slightly. "What happened to you?" "My own kind happened." The dragon's voice was bitter. "There was a coup. I fled. I failed. Now I die here in the dirt of your primitive world." That's when Dennis noticed the creature wasn't just protecting itself. Its front legs were curled around something, holding it close to its chest even in obvious agony. "What you got there?" Dennis asked. The dragon's eyes met his, and for a moment, Dennis saw something he recognized. Fear. Desperate, bone-deep fear. "My failure," the dragon whispered. Slowly, carefully, it loosened its grip. A thermal blanket, scorched and torn, fell away slightly. Dennis stepped closer, leaning in to see. Then he staggered backward, nearly tripping over debris. Inside that blanket were 3 tiny creatures. Babies. Dragon babies, each no bigger than a house cat. Their scales were dull, gray instead of vibrant colors. Their breathing was shallow, rapid. One wasn't moving at all. "Oh hell," Dennis breathed. "They are the royal bloodline," the dragon said quietly. "The rightful heirs to the throne. I was their guardian. I was supposed to protect them. Instead, I've brought them here to die slowly from exposure and starvation. So I beg you, human. Use your weapon. End their suffering. Then end mine. It is kinder than what awaits us." Dennis stared at those 3 tiny things. One of them made a sound, a weak little chirp that reminded him of the baby birds that sometimes fell out of nests on his property. He thought about his own kids. His daughter was off at college now, studying to be a veterinarian. His son was in the Navy, stationed somewhere he wasn't allowed to talk about. Dennis hadn't been able to protect them from everything in life, but he'd sure as hell tried. He looked back at the dragon, this massive warrior who'd probably killed more beings than Dennis could imagine, now broken and begging for death for the babies in its care. No, Dennis said finally. The dragon's eyes widened. What? I said no. Nobody dies in my barn today. Not you, not these babies, not on my watch. He slung his rifle over his shoulder. We're gonna get you out of this wreck and somewhere I can actually help you. You don't understand, the dragon protested weakly. They need specialized care. Specific temperatures, nutrients your world doesn't have. It's impossible. Dennis was already heading back to his truck for chains and the winch. Yeah, well, I've done impossible before. Had a calf born 3 weeks premature last year. Everyone told me to put it down. She's out in the south pasture right now, healthy as can be. These aren't cattle, the dragon said. Dennis looked back over his shoulder. No, but they're babies. And babies need someone to fight for them. So that's what we're gonna do. The dragon stared at him with those golden eyes, and Dennis could see it trying to understand. Trying to figure out if this human was stupid, crazy, or something else entirely. Maybe all three, Dennis thought. But he meant what he said. Nobody was dying in his field today. Not if he had anything to say about it. Getting the dragon out of the wreckage took 3 hours and nearly broke Dennis's truck in the process. The creature who'd finally told him its name was Scarth weighed close to 800 pounds, even half dead. Dennis had to use every chain, rope, and pulley system he owned, plus a flatbed trailer he usually reserved for moving hay bales. This is foolish, Scarth kept saying through gritted teeth as Dennis worked. The Empire will come looking. They'll kill you for harboring us. Let me worry about that, Dennis grunted, securing another chain. Right now you just focus on not dying. By the time they reached the barn, Dennis was drenched in sweat and his back was screaming. But he'd done it. Scarth lay on the trailer, those tiny hatchlings still clutched against his chest, and they were all still breathing. The barn wasn't much to look at. Dennis kept it clean enough, used it mostly for storage and the occasional sick animal. But it was warm, dry, and most importantly, private. His nearest neighbor was 4 miles down the road. He'd laid out every blanket he owned on the floor, created a makeshift bed big enough for Scarth. Getting the dragon off the trailer and onto those blankets was another ordeal, one that left both of them gasping. The hatchlings, Scarth wheezed. See to them first. Dennis carefully took the babies from Scarth's grip. They were so light, couldn't have weighed more than 3 or 4 pounds each. Their skin, no scales, he reminded himself, were cold to the touch. Way too cold. One of them wasn't moving at all. What do they need? Dennis asked, his farmer instincts kicking in. Temperature first. What temperature? 98 degrees, Scarth said weakly. Constant. Even a few degrees lower and their organs begin to shut down. Dennis blinked. That's human body temperature. Is it? Scarth's eyes flickered with something that might have been surprise. Strange coincidence. It wasn't really a coincidence, Dennis figured. Life was life no matter where it came from. He'd learned that much from farming. Everything needed similar things to survive, just in different amounts. He grabbed his space heaters and set them up around the blankets, then used his meat thermometer to check the temperature. 96 degrees. Close but not close enough. He added another heater and a heating pad he usually used for sore muscles. Food, Dennis said. What do they eat? Specialized protein slurries, Scarth said. His voice was getting weaker. Liquid minerals. Compounds your planet doesn't produce naturally. Without them, their development stops. They starve from the inside. Dennis looked at the 3 tiny creatures. The smallest one, a little thing with scales that might have been gold under better circumstances, still wasn't moving. He picked it up gently, held it against his chest. Sometimes warmth alone could jumpstart things. I've got mineral supplements, he said, thinking out loud. Use them for the cattle when the soil gets depleted. High concentration stuff. And protein, I've got protein powder I use for the calves sometimes. Medical grade stuff from the vet. It won't work, Scarth said, but there was less certainty in his voice now. Our biology is too different. Maybe. Dennis was already moving, grabbing supplies from his cabinets. Or maybe life's not as different as you think. You breathe oxygen, right? Your blood's red means you've got iron in it. Your babies need to be warm. Those are all earth things too. He mixed up a formula, using his cattle supplements, some electrolyte powder and protein concentrate. It looked awful, thick and gray, but the mineral content was through the roof. He'd given similar mixtures to sick animals before. The problem was getting it into the babies. They didn't have the strength to drink on their own. I need feeding tubes, Dennis muttered. Small ones. He remembered his daughter had left some medical supplies here years ago, back when she was first studying veterinary medicine. He dug through boxes until he found what he needed. Thin tubes meant for puppies or kittens. They'd work. The smallest hatchling, the one that hadn't moved, was still pressed against his chest. And then, so faint he almost missed it, he felt movement. A tiny shudder, then a breath. "Come on, little bit," Dennis whispered. "Stay with me." He named her Goldie right then, even though he knew he shouldn't name something that might not make it. But that was the thing about farming. You had to believe they'd make it, or what was the point? Getting the first feeding into them was delicate work. His hands, rough and calloused from years of labor, had never felt so clumsy. But he managed. Slow, careful, watching for any sign of distress. The tubes went down, the formula went in. "This is insane," Scarth said, watching from his makeshift bed. Dennis had cleaned and bandaged his wounds as best he could, using livestock antibiotics and burn cream. The dragon's wings were the worst of it. They'd need splints, probably surgery if such a thing was even possible. "Yeah, probably," Dennis agreed. He was monitoring the temperature constantly, adjusting the heaters. But insane's better than giving up. The first night was the longest of Dennis's life. He didn't sleep, couldn't. Every hour he checked temperatures, adjusted blankets, administered more formula. Scarth drifted in and out of consciousness, fever setting in from his injuries. Around 3 in the morning, one of the hatchlings made a sound. Not the weak chirp from before, but something stronger. A little squeak of protest when Dennis moved it to check its temperature. "That's it," he said, feeling a grin spread across his face. "That's what I want to hear. Get mad about it. Fight." By dawn, all three were moving. Not much, just little shifts and sounds, but it was more than they'd been doing. Their scales were still dull, their breathing still too fast, but they were stable. Scarth woke properly as the sun came up. His golden eyes focused on the hatchlings, then on Dennis, who was slumped in a chair, thermometer in one hand and feeding tube in the other. "They're alive," Scarth said, and his voice carried something Dennis hadn't heard before. Wonder, maybe. Or disbelief. "Course they are," Dennis said. "Told you. Nobody dies in my barn. Our physician said the survival rate for hatchlings in distress is less than 40%, even in our best hospitals with our best technology. You have none of that. Just..." Scarth looked around the barn. "Farm equipment and stubbornness." "Stubbornness counts for a lot," Dennis said. He stood up, his back cracking in protest. "My granddad used to say that humans are too dumb to know when something's impossible. So we just go ahead and do it anyway." Scarth made a sound that might have been a laugh. "Your species is very strange." "Yeah, we get that a lot." Dennis checked the smallest one, Goldie, again. She was warmer now, her breathing more regular. "You hungry? I've got some stew from last night. Don't know if you can eat human food, but figured I'd ask." "I can eat most organic proteins," Scarth said carefully, "though our dietary requirements are more specialized than yours." "Well, it's beef stew, so it's got protein. And vegetables. And probably too much salt, but that's how I make it." Dennis headed for his small kitchen area in the corner of the barn. "You need to keep your strength up. Can't take care of these babies if you're dead." As he heated up the stew, Dennis thought about what he'd gotten himself into. Alien dragon warriors. Galactic empires. Assassins probably coming to finish the job. His simple farm life had just gotten very complicated. But when he looked at those 3 tiny hatchlings, still fighting to survive, he knew he'd made the right choice. Because that's what you did. When something needed help, you helped. Didn't matter if it was a calf, a kitten, or an alien dragon baby. Life was life. And life was worth fighting for. 3 weeks had passed since the crash, and Dennis's barn had transformed into something between a hospital ward and a nursery. Charts covered the walls, tracking temperatures, feeding schedules, and weight gain down to the ounce. His sleep schedule had become whatever the hatchlings allowed, which wasn't much. The biggest one, who Dennis had started calling Bruno because of his stubborn personality, had gained almost 2 pounds. He was the color of deep ocean water now, his scales finally showing their true blue shade. The middle one, a crimson-colored female Dennis called Ruby, was the loudest of the 3. She'd squeak and chirp whenever she wanted attention, which was constantly. But it was Goldie, the smallest, who worried him most. She'd survived that first night, but she wasn't thriving like the others. She barely made sounds, barely moved unless Dennis picked her up. Her golden scales were brighter than before, but she was still underweight. "Come on, sweetheart," Dennis murmured, holding her against his chest while he prepared her feeding tube. It was 4 in the morning and he'd already been up for an hour. "Just a little more. You gotta eat." Scarth watched from his bed. The dragon's wings were splinted now, held in place by PVC pipes and duct tape. Not pretty but functional. His other wounds were healing faster than Dennis had expected. Turns out draconian biology included some serious regenerative abilities. "She's not going to make it," Scarth said quietly. It wasn't cruel, just factual. The smallest of a clutch rarely survives even in ideal conditions. Here with improvised care. "Don't say that where she can hear you," Dennis said sharply. "Animals know when you've given up on them. They can feel it. She's not an animal. She's draconian. She's a baby. Same rules apply." Dennis got the feeding tube in, watching carefully as the formula went down. Goldie's throat moved, swallowing. Good. That was good. He'd modified his formula 3 times now, adjusting the mineral ratios based on what seemed to work. Too much calcium and they got constipated. Too little and their scales didn't harden properly. It was all guesswork and observation, the same way he'd learned to care for every other creature on his farm. "I still don't understand how you're doing this," Scarth said. He'd been saying variations of this for weeks now. "Our scientists spend years studying hatchling development. We have technology that can monitor every biological function. And still we lose so many. You have none of that." Dennis finished with Goldie and set her carefully back on her heated pad. She curled up immediately, her tiny tail wrapping around herself. "I've got something better than technology. I've got time and attention." "That's not scientific." "No, but it works." Dennis moved to check on Bruno and Ruby. Both were sleeping, their breathing deep and steady. "You know what the problem is with technology? It's too easy to trust it and stop using your eyes. A monitor can tell you the temperature's right, but it can't tell you that a baby's shivering anyway. Numbers on a screen can't replace actually watching something grow." Scarth was quiet for a moment. "Your daughter. The one who studies animal medicine. Did she learn from you?" "Some." Dennis smiled, thinking about Katie. He hadn't told her what was happening. Couldn't risk it, not yet. "Mostly she learned by doing, same as me. I remember when she was 10 she found a baby rabbit that dogs had gotten to. Thing was torn up bad, probably should have died. But she stayed up 3 nights straight, feeding it with an eyedropper, keeping it warm. That rabbit lived another 6 years. Stubbornness runs in your family." "Guess it does." Dennis grabbed his coffee, cold now, and drank it anyway. "My dad was the same way. He'd spend all night with a sick horse, talking to it, keeping it company. Said animals shouldn't die alone and scared if you could help it." Over the next week, Dennis established a routine that would have broken most people. Every 2 hours he fed the hatchlings. Every 4 hours he changed their bedding and checked their skin for any signs of infection or scale rot. Every 6 hours he adjusted their heat sources and monitored the barn's humidity levels. Turns out baby draconians needed about 60% humidity or their respiratory systems got irritated. He learned by watching them. When Bruno's scales started flaking, Dennis realized the air was too dry and rigged up a humidifier using a crockpot and some towels. When Ruby stopped eating one morning, he noticed she kept scratching at her belly. A closer look showed a tiny piece of shell still stuck between her scales, irritating her. He removed it with tweezers and she was back to eating within hours. "You're a natural at this," Scarth observed one afternoon. His wings were healing well and he could move around the barn now, though flying was still out of the question. "Not natural. Just experienced." Dennis was giving Ruby a bath in lukewarm water. She seemed to love it, splashing and making happy chirping sounds. Every animal's different, but the basics are the same. Keep them clean, keep them fed, keep them comfortable. Pay attention when something changes. Our caretakers would use automated systems for most of this. "And how well did that work out?" Scarth didn't answer. They both knew the survival statistics. The breakthrough with Goldie came on day 23. Dennis had tried everything to get her to gain weight. Different formulas, different feeding schedules, different temperatures. Nothing seemed to help. She was surviving but barely. Then one morning, out of desperation more than anything else, Dennis tried something new. Instead of using the feeding tube, he held her against his chest, skin to skin, with just a thin blanket between them. He'd read once that premature human babies did better with skin contact. Something about regulating heartbeat and temperature naturally. He held her there for an hour, just talking to her softly while he did paperwork with his free hand. Told her about his farm, about his kids, about how his wife used to make the best apple pie in 3 counties. Just meaningless chatter to keep her company. When feeding time came, he offered the bottle instead of using the tube. He tried this before with no success. But this time Goldie latched on. Weak, but she did it. She actually drank on her own. "Well, I'll be damned," Dennis whispered. From that day forward, Goldie got an extra hour of contact time each day. And slowly, impossibly, she started gaining weight. Her chirps got louder. Her movements got stronger. She started following Dennis around the barn whenever he set her down, tiny claws clicking on the concrete floor. This shouldn't be possible, Scarth said, watching Goldie chase after Dennis's bootlace like it was prey. She should be dead. All of them should be. The trauma of the crash, the environmental stress, the improvised care. By every metric we have, this should have failed. Dennis picked up Goldie before she could get stepped on. She squeaked in protest but settled against his palm. Maybe that's your problem. Too many metrics, not enough heart. Heart is not a medical term. No, but it matters. Dennis checked Bruno and Ruby. Both were wrestling with each other now, building strength and coordination. You can have all the technology in the universe, but if you don't actually care about the thing you're trying to save, it doesn't matter. These babies know I'm not giving up on them. They can feel it. So they don't give up either. Scartha's golden eyes studied Dennis for a long moment. Your species barely has faster-than-light travel. Your medicine is primitive by galactic standards. Your technology is centuries behind ours. And yet here we are, Dennis finished. 3 baby dragons, alive and getting stronger every day. Sometimes being primitive means you gotta work harder. Pay more attention. Care more. Maybe that's not such a bad thing. The dragon nodded slowly, a gesture he'd picked up from watching Dennis. Perhaps not. Perhaps that is why humans are more frightening than they appear. You don't just survive. You make others survive whether they want to or not. Dennis laughed at that. Never thought of it that way, but yeah, I guess that's about right. We're too stubborn to let things die, even when they probably should. Goldie chirped from his hand, nuzzling against his thumb. Especially when they probably should, Dennis added with a smile. Dennis knew something was wrong the moment his dog started barking. Rex never barked at night, not unless something was seriously off. The old German shepherd had been with him for 9 years, and he'd learned to trust the dog's instincts better than his own sometimes. It was just past midnight. Dennis had been dozing in his chair, Goldie asleep on his lap while her siblings snored on their heated pads. Scartha's eyes snapped open at the same moment Rex went crazy outside. "They're here," Scarth said, his voice deadly quiet. "Who's here?" But Dennis already knew. He'd been expecting this for weeks, honestly. Surprised it had taken this long. Talon Guard. Elite assassins. For maybe 5 of them. Scarth tried to stand, winced as his healing wings protested. "You need to run. Take the hatchlings and go. I'll buy you time." Like how? Dennis was already moving, setting Goldie down gently with her siblings. He grabbed his rifle from the corner, checked the magazine. Full. He had more ammunition in the lockbox, along with his old service pistol from his Marine days. "You can't fight them," Scarth hissed. "They're trained killers. They've eliminated targets across 100 worlds." "Yeah, well, they haven't fought an angry farmer on his own land." Dennis moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. "I spent 2 tours in Afghanistan. I know a thing or two about defending territory." He'd been preparing for this actually. Not actively, but the old training never really left you. He'd reinforced the barn doors last week. Set up sight lines. Cleared fields of fire. Old habits from a life he'd tried to leave behind. Rex's barking cut off suddenly. Dennis's jaw tightened. "That wasn't good." "They killed your animal," Scarth said. "Yeah." Dennis felt anger surge through him, cold and focused. Rex had been a good dog. Loyal. Didn't deserve that. Bad move on their part. Now I'm really mad. The first one came through the eastern window, moving fast and silent. Would have been completely silent too, if Dennis hadn't rigged a tripwire connected to a bell from his tractor. The tiny chime was all the warning he needed. Dennis fired twice. Center mash just like they'd taught him. The figure went down hard. "One down," he muttered, already moving position. "Never stay where you shoot from." Another old lesson. Glass shattered from the north side. Dennis had expected that. He'd deliberately left that window weak, made it the obvious entry point. What the assassin didn't know was that Dennis had spent yesterday afternoon setting up a little surprise there. The crash and the scream told him his trap had worked. Turns out a spring-loaded rake to the face worked just as well on alien assassins as it would on burglars. "2 down," Dennis said, racking another round. Scarth was staring at him with something like shock. "You're actually fighting them." "Told you. My land, my rules." Dennis's eyes scanned the darkness. How many left? At least 2. Possibly 3. The barn door exploded inward. Not picked, not opened. Literally exploded. Chunks of wood flew everywhere. Dennis dove behind a support beam as something bright and hot sizzled past his head. Energy weapon of some kind. Great. A figure stepped through the smoke. 7 feet tall, covered in dark armor that seemed to absorb light. The assassin held a weapon that glowed with purple energy. "Give us the hatchlings, human," it said. The voice was wrong, filtered through a helmet. "Your bravery is noted. Your death need not be painful. How about you get off my property instead?" Dennis fired 3 times. The bullets sparked off the armor but didn't penetrate. He'd figured that might be the case. The assassin laughed and raised its weapon. That's when Scarth hit it from the side. The dragon might have had broken wings, but he was still 800 pounds of muscle and rage. He crashed into the assassin like a freight train, claws tearing at armor joints, teeth snapping at exposed neck seals. Dennis didn't waste the opportunity. He switched targets, firing at a second figure trying to circle around. This one wasn't as heavily armored. His shots found home and the assassin dropped. The fight between Scarth and the armored one was brutal. They crashed through equipment, knocked over shelves, sent tools flying. The hatchlings were screaming now, high-pitched terrified sounds that made Dennis's protective instincts go into overdrive. The armored assassin got its weapon up, pressed it against Scarth's chest. Dennis saw the glow intensify, knew what was coming. He didn't think, just acted. Grabbed a wrench from his workbench and threw it as hard as he could. It wasn't a good throw, wasn't even aimed properly. But it hit the weapon's barrel just as it fired. The energy blast went wide, blowing a hole in the barn wall instead of through Scarth's chest. Scarth used the distraction. His jaws closed around the assassin's helmet and crushed it. The sound was sickening. The assassin stopped moving. Silence fell over the barn, broken only by heavy breathing and the hatchlings' cries. "Is that all of them?" Dennis asked, already moving to check on the babies. They were terrified but unharmed. "I think so." Scarth was bleeding from a dozen new wounds. "But more will come. They always send more." Dennis checked each hatchling carefully. Bruno was puffed up, trying to look threatening despite being the size of a house cat. Ruby was hissing, a tiny sound that would have been cute under other circumstances. Goldie had hidden under a blanket and was shaking. "Hey, it's okay," Dennis murmured, scooping her up. "You're safe. I've got you." He looked around his barn. It was a disaster. Bullet holes in the walls, equipment destroyed, blood everywhere. Some of it was red, human or draconian. Some was other colors, alien. His home. His safe place. Violated. "I need to call this in," Dennis said, pulling out his phone. Then he paused. "Actually, who do I even call? Local sheriff's gonna have a hard time with dead aliens in my barn." "Don't," Scarth said. "The moment your authorities get involved, word spreads. More will come and they'll be better prepared." "So what, we just sit here and wait for round 2? "No." Scarth looked at the carnage, then at the hatchlings. "We prepare. You've shown you can fight. But you're right about one thing. This is your land. You know it better than any assassin ever could." Dennis thought about that. Thought about his property, every hill and valley, every fence line and irrigation ditch. Places he could set traps. Places he could defend. "Yeah," he said slowly. "Yeah, I do know this land. 40 acres, every inch of it." He set Goldie down with her siblings, made sure they were calm. Then he looked at Scarth. "If more are coming, we don't wait for them. We make this place into somewhere they wish they'd never found. You do that? Risk more of your life for us." Dennis looked at the 3 hatchlings, at Bruno trying to be brave, at Ruby hissing at shadows, at Goldie peeking out from her blanket. He thought about Rex lying dead somewhere outside. About his barn shot up and damaged. "They came to my home," Dennis said quietly. "Killed my dog. Tried to hurt babies under my protection. Damn right I'm gonna risk my life. This is what humans do. We protect what's ours. And you folks? You're mine now." Scarth made a sound, something between a growl and a laugh. "Your species is insane." "Yeah," Dennis agreed, checking his rifle. "But we're also really hard to kill. So let's show these assassins what happens when you mess with a marine farmer from Nebraska." He started making a list in his head. Tripwires along the access roads. Motion sensors from his hunting equipment. Maybe rig up some of his farm equipment as obstacles. He had tannerite for clearing stumps. That could be useful. They wanted to come for his family? Fine. Let them come. They'd learn real quick that humans didn't go down easy, especially not on their own land. 2 months had passed since the night of the attack, and Dennis's farm looked nothing like it used to. What had once been a simple wheat and cattle operation now resembled something between a fortress and a refugee camp. It started small. A few draconians showing up in the middle of the night, Loyalists who'd heard rumors about the human protecting the royal hatchlings. Then more came. Soldiers who'd refused to follow the new regime. Nobles who'd lost everything. Common citizens who just wanted their rightful rulers back. Dennis's barn had become a command center. His fields housed temporary shelters. His property line was now defended by a mix of human ingenuity and draconian technology, which turned out to be a surprisingly effective combination. "Another transport just landed in the North Pasture," said Lieutenant Banks, a young Marine who'd volunteered to help after Dennis had finally broken down and made some calls to his old unit. Turns out a lot of his former brothers-in-arms were happy to help when they heard what he was doing. "How many this time?" Dennis asked. He was feeding Goldie, who'd grown considerably. She was still the smallest, but she was healthy now, active, full of personality. She chirped happily as she ate from his hand. 15. Families mostly. They're asking for asylum. Dennis sighed. His 40-acre farm was getting crowded. Put them in Sector 3. Make sure they get food and medical attention. It was crazy how his life had changed. 2 months ago, his biggest concern had been wheat prices and whether he needed to replace his combine. Now he was running what amounted to a small settlement for alien refugees. The hatchlings had grown fast. Bruno was the size of a large dog now, his blue scales gleaming in the sunlight. He'd started trying to fly last week, much to Scartha's dismay. The barn roof still had scorch marks from where Bruno's first attempt at fire-breathing had gone wrong. Ruby was even bigger, more aggressive. She'd appointed herself as the guardian of the younger draconians who'd arrived, despite being a juvenile herself. Dennis had watched her chase off a full-grown warrior twice her size when he'd gotten too close to some hatchlings. The warrior had retreated, embarrassed but respectful. And Goldie, his little fighter, had become something special. She was small, probably always would be compared to her siblings, but she had something they didn't. She'd bonded with Dennis in a way that fascinated the other draconians. She followed him everywhere, slept in his room, and refused to eat unless he was nearby. "The Galactic Council sent another delegation," Scarth said, approaching with his wings fully healed now. He could fly again, though he rarely left the farm. "They want to meet with you." "What do they want this time?" Dennis was tired of delegations. They'd been coming for weeks, ever since word spread about what was happening here. "Same as before. They want to offer you compensation. A seat at the negotiating table. Official recognition as guardian to the royal bloodline." Scarth paused. "They're also offering you citizenship in any system you choose. Your choice of planets. Wealth beyond your imagination." Dennis snorted. "Don't want any of that." "I know. I told them you'd say that. They didn't believe me." A draconian female approached, bowing slightly. She was one of the nobles, someone important whose name Dennis could never remember. "Mr. Webb, the delegation is waiting in the meeting area. Tell them I'll be there when I'm done feeding the kids," Dennis said, not looking up from Goldie. The noble looked scandalized. "But they've traveled across 3 systems too. And these babies need to eat on schedule," Dennis interrupted. "They can wait 10 minutes. After she left, Scarth chuckled. "You know you're probably insulting some of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, right? Don't care. The kids come first." Dennis set Goldie down, watched her waddle over to play with Bruno. "Besides, if they're that important, they should understand priorities." The meeting went about as expected. A dozen representatives from various species, all wanting to thank him, offer him things, ask him questions. Dennis sat through it patiently, gave simple answers, and declined everything they offered. "Mr. Webb," said one representative, a crystalline being whose name Dennis hadn't caught. "Surely you want something for your efforts? You've accomplished what our best xenobiologists said was impossible. You've raised 3 draconian royals to healthy adolescence using primitive equipment and improvised methods. You deserve recognition." "I did what needed doing," Dennis said. "Don't need recognition for that. But you've changed the course of galactic politics. The Draconian Empire is reforming because of you. The rightful heirs are alive because of your actions." Dennis looked out the window at his farm. Bruno was teaching some younger draconians how to hunt field mice. Ruby was organizing the children into teams for some kind of game. Goldie was napping in a sunbeam. "I didn't do it for politics," he said quietly. "I did it because someone asked me to kill children and I couldn't do that. Simple as that." The representatives exchanged glances. Finally, one spoke up, a being that looked like a floating jellyfish. "We don't understand your species, Mr. Webb. You have so little compared to others. Your technology is limited. Your lifespan is short. Your bodies are fragile. And yet we keep going," Dennis finished. "Yeah, I've heard this before. You all think it's some big mystery why humans do what we do. Isn't it? Dennis thought about his daughter studying to save animals, his son serving his country, his father staying up all night with sick horses, his wife who'd volunteered at the animal shelter every weekend until the cancer took her. No mystery, he said. We just care. That's all. We see something that needs help and we help it. We see something that needs protecting and we protect it. Doesn't matter if it's a person, an animal, or an alien dragon baby. If it needs us, we show up. But why? Another representative asked. What do you gain? Gain? Dennis almost laughed. I've lost sleep, spent my savings, got my barn shot up, and I'm probably on some intergalactic hit list. I haven't gained anything. Then why do it? Dennis looked at them, these powerful beings from across the galaxy who had everything but couldn't understand the simplest thing. Because they needed me, he said. That's enough. Later that evening, after the delegation had left disappointed and confused, Dennis sat on his porch. The farm was quiet, most of the refugees settling in for the night. Scarth joined him, moving with the easy grace of someone fully healed. The empire is fracturing, Scarth said. The new regime can't maintain control. Too many have seen what you did here, how you protected the hatchlings when their own kind wanted them dead. It's inspired revolts across a dozen systems. That wasn't my goal. I know. But it happened anyway. Scarth was quiet for a moment. The hatchlings will need to return soon. Take their rightful place. They're old enough now, strong enough. You've given them everything they needed. Dennis nodded, though his chest felt tight. He'd known this day was coming. They'll make good leaders. Bruno's brave, Ruby's fierce, and Goldie? He smiled. Goldie's got heart. They learned that from you. Nah. They were born with it. I just kept them alive long enough to show it. Goldie appeared from around the corner, chirping softly. She'd grown, but she still acted like a baby around Dennis. She climbed into his lap, curled up like she'd done 100 times before. She doesn't want to leave you, Scarth observed. I know. But she has to. She's got a job to do, being royalty and all. Dennis stroked her scales gently. That's the thing about raising kids. You prepare them for the world, then you let them go do what they're meant to do. You're very wise for a simple farmer. Not wise. Just experienced. Dennis watched the stars come out, same stars he'd watched his whole life, though he knew now they held worlds beyond counting. You know what the funny thing is? All those representatives asking what humans want, what we gain. They think we're looking for something. Aren't you? We already have what we want. We want things to live. We want kids to grow up safe. We want to leave the world a little better than we found it. He looked down at Goldie. That's not complicated. That's just being human. 3 weeks later, Dennis stood in his yard watching 3 young dragons prepare to leave. They'd grown so much were nearly adult-sized now. Bruno's scales gleamed like sapphires. Ruby's crimson hide was marked with silver patterns. And Goldie, smallest but fastest, her golden scales catching the sunlight like treasure. A fleet waited in orbit, loyalists ready to restore the rightful rulers. But the 3 youngsters weren't in a hurry to leave. Bruno approached first, lowering his massive head. Dennis scratched behind his horns, the way he'd done since Bruno was small enough to hold. You take care of your sisters, Dennis said. And remember, being strong doesn't mean being cruel. Real strength is protecting those weaker than you. Ruby was next. She nuzzled against him, purring like a cat the size of a pickup truck. And you, young lady. That temper of yours will serve you well, but remember to think before you act. Smart beats strong every time. Then Goldie. She didn't want to leave his side, kept chirping and pressing against him. Dennis knelt down, held her face in his hands. Hey, little bit. You're gonna do great things. I know you're scared, but you're braver than you think. You survived when nobody thought you would. That makes you the strongest of all. She made a sound, something between a whimper and a growl. I know. I'll miss you too. But you've got a job to do. People need you. He stood up, stepped back. Now go on. Make this old farmer proud. The 3 dragons took flight, circling once overhead before joining the fleet. Dennis watched until they disappeared into the sky. Scarth stood beside him. You gave them life. The galaxy won't forget that. Don't care if they forget, Dennis said, wiping his eyes. I'll remember. That's enough. He turned back to his farm, to the life he'd built. There was work to do. Fields to plant. Refugees still needing help. And somewhere in the galaxy, 3 young dragons who'd learned that the best things humans do, they do simply because someone needed them to. That was the human way. And it was enough.